Hi, everyone. Welcome to John Madden Football.
Hey, Big Easy Sports Talk listeners. I am here with Nick Risco, and I am Jonathan Dixon. We're doing a special Madden 20 ratings podcast today, a little different from our traditional Saints Pelicans podcast. So Nick is going to help us as a player type of person in the NFL versus a Madden type of structure to this conversation. So we want to give his perspective versus sort of a video game algorithm type of comparison for these players. So I just want to bring everybody into the conversation. What we're talking about is specifically Saints players who are on the Madden rankings for this year's video game 2020. If you guys haven't already, make sure to go ahead and like us on Facebook, and you can follow us on all social medias at Best Podcast NOLA. You can find myself on Twitter at JDixonNOLA, and Nick, you can also find him at Fantasy Law Guy. And Nick, welcome back. I know you like talking about the Saints. This is a little different from what we usually talk about. How much Madden have you played recently, and how do you feel about the rankings that I've sent over to you today?
I haven't played Madden in over a decade, okay, but I am into the rankings. I like things to be accurate, of course, and I've looked at all the rankings, and I have a lot of opinions here. And I used to play back as a kid, so I understand the basics of the game. I understand that they have an algorithm, and they rate players based on their speed, agility, awareness, and all kinds of different categories that are weighted differently by position. And when I played as a kid, I used to play online back when I think Madden Online was really first came out, like when it was on the computer, and you went out and bought one of those controllers. It kind of looked like a PlayStation controller, if you know what I'm talking about, where it had the colors on it instead of the square, triangle, and circle and everything like that. But anyway, I'd connect my little controller to the computer and play online when it first came out when I was young. But since then, you know I'm a Nintendo 64 guy. I don't have an Xbox. I don't have PlayStation, so I don't even have the systems to play Madden on. Because didn't they take it off the computer?
I'm not sure if they still do the games on like the PC. I'm definitely more of an Xbox guy than PlayStation. That's all I can really say about it.
Yeah, I haven't graduated from Nintendo 64 yet, so no, I haven't been able to play the updated Madden. But it is interesting, and I'm glad you came up with this idea for the podcast. I'm excited to get into it because obviously I have a lot of opinions on how players should be rated, even if it is for a video game I don't play. I can understand just player comparisons and who should be better than other players, and et cetera.
Yeah, and so if anybody's listening and they're more of a Saints fan and not really into Madden, I do want you to stay tuned for this because it does give a formula behind the Madden's overall ratings on 538.com. Nate Silver's website gives a real great breakdown of how their actual attributes actually go into this and how it changes where you may actually see somebody as a 92 and their attributes actually give them a 94 based on what their real-time attributes should be. So right off the bat, I just want to kind of get into an overview of the actual teams in the NFL. So Madden 20 has an overall ranking for each individual team, and they also have it for players. So overall for teams, the top 5 teams are the Eagles at 89 overall. They have an 84 defense and an offense at 87. The Cowboys are at 88 with an 86 on both sides of the field. The Saints come in at number 3. They're 87 overall with an 82 defense and a 92 offensive ranking. And then they're right above the Patriots, who are 87, and then the Packers right there also at 87 too as well. So, Nick, just from a NFL standpoint, does that make sense, those top 5 and where they land?
It sounds surprising, ranking Dallas Cowboys at number 2. But when you actually look at the talent on the roster, it doesn't actually – I don't think it's a terrible ranking, honestly. I think you could make the case that Dallas is a top 5 team in terms of talent. The reason that people don't have Dallas going further than they are, or being better than they are, is because of their coaching. And in Madden, you're the coach, right? So just purely I'm going to try to grade this objectively, just purely from a player and talent standpoint, and try to take coaches out of it, right? Because you are the coach and the GM in Madden, so that shouldn't really be factored in. So I do think the Saints have one of the most talented teams in the league. I see the Eagles as top 5. I don't know if I would put them at number 1. I think the Bears are extremely talented, probably should be top 5. I'm okay with, you're obviously going to give New England a lot of credit. I don't know if they have a top 5 talented team on paper if you take out like the coaching aspect of Bill Belichick. I think the Falcons and Panthers, even though they're in their division, I think that they're extremely talented teams. I'm kind of struggling. I think the Browns are actually very talented. But if I had to if I had to really critique that top 5, I'm not appalled by any of it, honestly. And there was nothing you said that really surprised me. I think a lot of people will be surprised by Dallas. But if you take out Jason Garrett and you take out their offensive coordinator and defensive coordinator, the Rod Marinelli is pretty good. But if you take out their offensive coordinator, because you're calling the plays, Kellen Moore, and you take out Jason Garrett, you could really make the argument that Dallas should probably have a better team, but coaching and kind of their dinosaur archaic scheme kind of really holds them back. So I'm actually okay with the overall team rankings that you listed so far.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you brought up the coaching aspect, because I'm looking at this list, and two teams that I would suspect in actual NFL rankings that may kind of take over part of this list is the Rams and perhaps the Chiefs in the NFL.
That's true. I didn't mention them.
It's surprising, obviously, just like you said about the Cowboys, because, yes, their talent is an 88, and I can see that, but also I think what the problem that these video games kind of don't factor into it is Dallas is usually injury-riddled. They're also dealing with suspensions from drugs or whatever type of criminal activities that are going on. And it's not to say that that's every year, but it's a situation that they deal with. So I can see where these games kind of give an overhype to teams, and they don't have to go through this because it's a sort of like a simulated type of deal where they're not actually dealing with these type of suspensions and off-the-field type of things that may actually take these players who are rated that high out of these games. So I'm a little iffy on taking these team stats. I'm more closer to try to get into the player stats. So what I really want to jump into on, we don't want to go over every single Saints player because there's about 70 or plus players on the team. But I do want to get down to, the players that everybody really knows about. And obviously we're going to start off with quarterbacks. So Drew Brees is rated as a 92 overall. He was a 92 overall last year in the 19 game. So not really much has changed, but you could say he's declined a little bit. Just to round out the numbers of where everybody's at in his area, Mahomes is a 97 overall. He's the number 1 quarterback. Brady at 96. Coming in at number 3 is also Phillip Rivers at 94. Previously, he was an 87 from last year. And then beneath Brees is Rodgers, who was previously a 97, and now he's a 90. Both of these guys, are they coming in too high for Rivers and too low for Rodgers?
The Phillip Rivers at 94, I'm actually okay with it from a pure grade standpoint. I think that Phillip Rivers being a 94 on the surface doesn't sound inaccurate. The inaccuracy comes when you start to say that Andrew Luck is a 92 and Aaron Rodgers is a 90 and they're lower than Rivers. I think that I have Andrew Luck and Aaron Rodgers being much better I wouldn't say much better, but definitely better quarterbacks than Phillip Rivers. And also I have Drew, if Phillip Rivers is going to be a 94 and Drew Brees is a 92 and Brady is a 96, as you said, those quarterbacks to me can all be grouped very similarly. I think that Brees and Brady and Rivers all have a case for being in that top tier, upper echelon quarterback with declining skills. We've seen all of their arms over the course of the last 2 seasons In the last 2 seasons, all 3 of those quarterbacks' arms has faded down the stretch. We've seen them kind of wear down. I'm actually okay with the idea of ranking Drew Brees 92, Phillip Rivers. I wouldn't rank Rivers ahead of Brees by any means. And I just don't see that big of a difference between Drew Brees, Tom Brady, and Phillip Rivers at this stage of their career. I think you can make the argument, and many Saints fans will, that Brees deserves to be higher because he was so great last season, but he really wasn't that. He was amazing for, 11 games. But when you took the other 7 games that he had to play, he was actually just an average quarterback. I mean, you can look at any statistic. You can go back and watch the film. You can do whatever measurement you want to do. Drew Brees was an average quarterback in the last 7 games of last season. So in Brady, you can make the same case for Brady and Rivers. I mean, the numbers tell the story, the eye test tells the story, the film tells the story, whatever you want by whatever metric is. And I think Madden is kind of taking that into account for Drew by ranking him at 92, but it doesn't seem like they're taking into account for Brady, maybe just because he won a Super Bowl. And it certainly doesn't seem they're taking into account for Rivers, who's in the 94 and the 3rd best quarterback. I would put Drew, if I were creating Madden, I would put Drew around 92, honestly, at this point in his career. I would put Brady around 92, and I'd put Rivers probably around 91. Andrew Luck and Rodgers, to me, would be much higher. If you have Mahomes at 97, which I'm okay with, I would probably have Andrew Luck at a 95 and Rodgers probably at a 96 or 95. That would kind of be my rankings if I was ranking the quarterbacks right now. I would have Patrick Mahomes. He would be my first choice. If they were just playing in the 2019 season, I would take Mahomes, and not fantasy, of course, just real life. I would take Mahomes first. You're trying to win a Super Bowl. I think that Aaron Rodgers and Luck would be my next tier. And then after that, I would kind of group Brees, Brady, and Rivers as kind of the same kind of tier in that low 90 range, honestly. So I'm not, to answer your question directly, in summary, I'm not really appalled by Brees' 92 rating. I actually think it's very accurate when you take into account how he faded down the stretch. I do think it's appalling that Brady and Rivers are higher than Brees. There's really no reason for that. And I certainly think it's appalling that Andrew Luck and Aaron Rodgers are lower than Phillip Rivers.
Yeah, that makes sense. And the second guy, that is coming up on the list for a running back is Alvin Kamara. Obviously, he's a 90 ranking. We have him sort of at the back end of the 90 list behind Gurley, Zeke, Bell, Melvin Gordon, Saquon Barkley, McCaffrey, and Kareem Hunt. Do you find this ranking at 90 kind of being on the back end of these guys at the right spot for Kamara, or should he be higher up on this list?
The 2 running backs that just stuck out to me when you were listing that group was actually, even more so than Kamara, was actually Christian McCaffrey. You mentioned him. What is he, a 90?
He's a 91.
That was 91. Yeah, I think Christian McCaffrey showed last year that he's far better than a 91. I don't see how McCaffrey wouldn't be, with as versatile as he is, I don't see how he wouldn't be a 95 or higher at the running back position at this day and age. I'm interested to see, who is the top. You mentioned Gurley is the top-rated running back?
Yes, he's a 97.
Okay, I got you. Yeah, I'd probably put McCaffrey at 95. I'd probably put Kamara at 94-ish. I would rate him higher, which I think Saints fans will like that. I'm not willing to go above 94 for a couple of reasons. Unlike McCaffrey and guys like Saquon Barkley, who I also thought was a little low, and guys like Ezekiel Elliott and Gurley, those guys have shown that they can withstand, 300-plus touches for a season. Alvin Kamara is getting touches in the low 200s here. He has not shown that durability factor. I'm not really sure how Madden rates that in their actual ratings, but if I'm just kind of ranking the running backs right now from a all things considered perspective, when you consider their talent, their what they've shown so far in the league, do I trust their durability? Do I trust them to play 16 games? Like, can I feed them the ball? and their versatility, of course, how I can use them. To me, it seems like I would have Gurley, Saquon Barkley, Ezekiel Elliott, Christian McCaffrey, probably David Johnson would be in there, and then probably Kamara. Because I know Kamara probably on a per-touch basis is just as good as all these guys, but he hasn't shown that he can be that bell cow yet. So I can't put him above the other guys who have been arguably just as good with worse situations than the Saints, great offensive line, and Sean Payton, who's always made running backs look good. Kamara's great, but I really can't put him above a 94.
Yeah, and another guy I think that is an interesting standout here that local fans from LSU would be interested in. Leonard Fournette is actually an 81. He's way down the list behind some like Marlon Mack, and I think Austin Eckler is ahead of him.
Wow,
it's a strange thing. I know that Fournette's going through some changes in Jacksonville, but do you think 81 compared to the guys who are obviously he's not going to make this top list, but I feel like he should be closer to the edge of this list than closer to an 80.
Again, this is another situation where when you're just giving me the raw number and without telling me anything, if I were to grade an NFL talent for a video game like this, and you said, hey, Fournette's coming in as an 81, I don't think it's that crazy. I think it's okay. But when you say guys like Austin Eckler ahead of him, that's what really gives me concern. So can you list some of the guys who, other than Eckler, who are above Fournette, so I can kind of just see what they're basing, or just how they're basing this 81 rating on?
So the guys who are right above him, Jerick McKinnon, LaShawn McCoy, Mack, Eckler, and Breida are right there at 82. So that's who he's underneath right now.
Yeah, that's absolutely crazy. See, the numbers to me aren't striking, because like if you were to just tell me, hey, what would you rank Leonard Fournette, like, just offhand, like if you were starting a Madden game, what would you rank Leonard Fournette? I'd probably say like an 83 or something, like I said, but I would never ever put like, Jerick McKinnon over him. That doesn't make any sense. Austin Eckler has shown nothing to warrant that, nor has McKinnon. Marlon Mack, for all we know, could be a one-year wonder. I don't think Marlon Mack would be better than Fournette if they had equal blocking and equal situation. That's what I'm trying to rank these guys by, is just if everybody was in the same situation, right? Like it can be on Madden. Like if you have a fantasy draft or whatever it is, you draft your franchise. If all these running backs worked behind the same offensive line, they had the same quarterback and the same coaching, who would get – they work in the same plays, who would have the most efficient season? Like, who would be better? And to me, Fournette outproduces Marlon Mack. He outproduces McKinnon. He outproduces Eckler easily. But I still don't think he's that much better than like an 83. I'm still not alarmed or really concerned by his 81 ranking. He just hasn't done enough yet to warrant much higher.
Okay, and so we're moving on to the wide receivers, which I think is the most accurate of all the sort of the rankings and where our Saints player falls. So we have one of the few 99s that are listed in Madden is DeAndre Hopkins. Antonio Brown is at 98. Julio is also at 98. Odell Beckham at 96. And then Michael Thomas is right there at 95. So the top five guys, 95 or above. Does that sound about right with that ranking list?
The receiver ratings are much more accurate, in my opinion, than pretty much any other position. I looked at all the positions, and I kind of scanned through them and just kind of found some outliers that I really just thought were ridiculous ratings. And to me, receiver, I had the hardest time with, especially near the top, because I thought, hey, I can, I'm just trying to look for outliers. I know there's going to be, Madden's not going to get every person exactly based on my opinion. Like, for example, DeAndre Hopkins, I don't think I would have given him a 99, but I probably would have given him a 98 or 97. So I'm not too concerned about that ranking, right? Like, that's just, you're drawing, I mean, you're basically, that's, a toss up. If you want to argue, you can argue that either way. But I'm just looking for rankings that are really patently, crazy to me where they're way off. And the receivers seem to have the least amount of craziness, in my opinion, especially near the top. I mean, I tend to agree, at least in terms of, one or 2 point rating difference, which is really nothing in the grand scheme of things. I pretty much agree with all the top, I would say 15 receivers, honestly. I really had no concerns whatsoever. I thought Emmanuel Sanders looked pretty high at 88, but other than that, the top 15 or 20 receivers I was perfectly fine with. It seemed pretty accurate to me.
Yeah, and the last guy who's over a 90 for the Saints is Cam Jordan. If you're looking at the defensive ends by themselves, the left end and right end, there's a big drop-off. Aaron Donald, another one of the 99s, J.J. Watt at 97, Calais Campbell and Myles Garrett, both 92 and 91, and Cam falls right there at number 5. There's a big drop-off with those numbers, and I'm not even sure J.J. Watt is still that 97. How do you feel about Cam pulling up at number 5 on the defensive end list?
There's a lot. This is a loaded question, Piano Man, because, I have to – I'm going to answer your Cam question first. I don't think he should be rated a 91. I think out of all the Saints players you've mentioned, I know a lot of people are fussing about Drew Brees as a 92. I think that's perfectly legitimate, to be honest. Kamara being a 90 is a little low, and you can argue Brees is a little low, but not to the point where I think it's worth calling out the video game for. Michael Thomas seems accurately rated at a 95, but this is the first one where I really think is flat out wrong. Cam Jordan being a 91 is a travesty. Cam Jordan is one of the best players in the NFL, period, regardless of position. If the NFL had a draft right now, a fantasy draft just for one season, let's say, and they were just picking on who the most valuable players are in this league, after all the decent quarterbacks went, Cam Jordan would be one of the first defensive players taken, honestly. I mean, he's that important to a team. And him being a 91, he's also one of the best defensive players in all of football. I would rank Cam Jordan as a 96, honestly. So that's a 5-point difference right there. I think he's that good. He's all around. There's really no weaknesses to his game. He's good every single year. He produces every single year. I think he would produce on any other team, so it's not just limited to the Saints. He's also played in a 3-4 before. He has also played in a 4-3. So different, position versatility there is important. He just really doesn't do anything wrong. He bats down passes. He beats you with strength. He beats you with agility. He gets great numbers, production every year. And he does it this is all despite the fact that the Saints have failed to put a legitimate pass rusher opposite of him to command any attention whatsoever. I mean, this has been a huge need for the Saints, and we've struggled to find anyone who could take attention away from Cam Jordan, so he's facing double teams, or at least running backs are chipping him far more than often. He's the focal point of attention if you're an offensive line. Or if you're an opposing quarterback or opposing offensive coordinator, he's one of the key players you have to have blocked, yet he's still producing, and he's still that great. So to me, this is the first one that is really eye-opening for me in terms of Saints players. I think Cam Jordan should be closer to 96 than he is 91. But Piano Man, this brings a much bigger discussion here because you mentioned you were trying to compare him to guys like J.J. Watt and Aaron Donald, and that really just doesn't make any sense to me as a football guy because I'm looking through these Madden ratings, and they seem to have players ranked based on defensive end, right end, left end, and defensive tackle, and then linebacker. But when you look through all of these defensive ends and defensive tackles, they are all jumbled up based on what these guys are actually playing for their teams. It's almost like, for example, Aaron Donald is not a defensive end by any stretch of the imagination. He's not. And he shouldn't be graded as a defensive end. He might line up as defensive end. If the Rams play their base 3-4 defense and Aaron Donald lines up technically at left end, that might be for maybe 18% of snaps, maybe 15 to 18% of snaps. But teams are often lining up with 4 down linemen. And when that happens, because of any pass formation, or if they just go into a 4-3, when that happens, Aaron Donald's playing defensive tackle. And so he should be ranked among the defensive tackles. And in my opinion, since we're on the subject of Aaron Donald, if I were making a Madden game, he would be my only 99 out of the whole game. I think Aaron Donald is that superior. There's a lot of great players in the NFL, Piano Man, but I think Aaron Donald, based on the position he plays, deserves a category of his own. He would be my own 99 there. But I have to clarify this because it's crazy how Madden ranks these guys, and I'm sure it affects gameplay. Like, you're seeing these linebackers, like Von Miller is ranked as a linebacker in this game, and so is Luke Kuechly. They play two totally different positions. If you're doing it right, Madden needs to change this to a position needs to be edge rusher, which includes all pass rushers, like Cam Jordan, Von Miller. Doesn't matter if they play in a 4-3 base or a 3-4 base. Base defense is almost eradicated at this point because it's irrelevant. It's like an archaic, antiquated dinosaur concept because everyone's in their nickel and dime formations nowadays, and that's what you'd be judging these positions on. Aaron Donald and J.J. Watt are not defensive ends. They're defensive tackles. Defensive tackles should include all 4-3 defensive tackles and 3-4 ends. Edge rushers should include all 3-4 outside linebackers and all 4-3 defensive ends. And off-ball linebackers, your traditional stand-up linebacker like Luke Kuechly or Leighton Vander Esch or whoever, Demario Davis for the Saints, all those should be grouped in one. Because if you group them all together, then all your rankings are going to – not only are your ratings going to be skewed, but your comparisons. Like, we can't compare Luke Kuechly to Von Miller. They play two totally different positions. So anyway, that's my biggest problem with these Madden rankings is this positional, these positional flaws, and I'm sure it affects gameplay too. Like I can't really speak to that directly, but it has to because they're rating players differently, and they're not rating them at the proper positions that they're playing. I mean, again, J.J. Watt and Aaron Donald are purely defensive tackles, not defensive ends. They play way different positions than Cam Jordan does. So Cam Jordan should not be graded against them at all. But even then, like I said, Cam Jordan should be much higher regardless of how you grade him.
Right, and the things that you bring up, obviously you're coming from an outsider perspective on this, right? You're not playing the game, so you're just kind of grading them.
Yeah.
And then also their defensive schemes are different, so they may line up as an end defensive tackle. They may even line up as a outside linebacker depending on the switches in the schemes. So one of the things that happens like in Madden games, at least from a personal perspective, is that I've played sometimes and actually thrown in a defensive end at defensive tackle because his rating for that defensive end, who may be lower than like a Cam Jordan, but he's also going to be higher than somebody who's maybe like a C or D grade player that you were able to draft. So
yeah, and those positional flaws allow you to do something like that and kind of break the game, if you will, right. I imagine, because that's not realistic and that's not their proper position. So in my opinion, Madden next year, maybe Madden 21 should, and I think they will. I'm not just speaking, going on a rant or a tangent here. I honestly believe that because other websites are starting to do this. Like Pro Football Focus started to do this a couple of years ago. You're seeing other analytical websites start to, instead of saying defensive end and defensive tackle, they're saying edge rusher, defensive tackle, which includes all 3-4 defensive ends and 4-3 defensive tackles, and off-ball linebacker, which is your traditional stand-up linebacker, not to include your Von Millers who may stand up and play linebacker for 20% of their snaps, but Von Miller's mainly putting his hand in the ground and, in a 3-point stance rushing the passer for 80% of his snaps. So at least I would say I'd be willing to wager that it's probably more like 85 or 90%. So Madden needs to get their I hate to use their EA Sports thing against them, but they need to get in the game and they need to make these ranking or these positional system for the linebackers, defensive tackles, and defensive ends more accurate and more modern to reflect today's NFL. And I think they will in probably 1 or 2 years, because I cannot imagine. I don't even play Madden. I'm complaining about this. So I cannot imagine how many complaints they've got about this already. And it's just inexcusable, in my opinion, at this day and age to grade positions or players at the wrong position at this point.
Okay, so we've talked about pretty much the over 90 guys. Really, the last individual guy that I'll go over is Marshawn Lattimore. And I don't even want to tell you the number because it's just I need you to kind of like take it in. If you ranked him just purely as a cornerback, 1 to 10, 10 to 20, where does he rank of all the cornerbacks in the league? Where would you slot him?
Marshawn Lattimore is easily a top 10 cornerback in the NFL. I would rank him, although I do think his play dropped off a little last year. And I do think that he's had his fair share of hiccup games. We've seen some against Julio Jones, for example. I think Mike Evans really had his number last year after Lattimore kind of owned him early in that series. But to me, Lattimore's probably, if I had to say, I could probably only name about 4 or 5 cornerbacks who I would probably rather, just on a one-year basis, than Marshawn Lattimore. I would probably put his rating at 90, I'm going to say 94, 93 if I had to say. I would imagine cornerbacks are pretty substantial. I think Stephon Gilmore and Jalen Ramsey deserve to have probably 97 or 98 cornerback ratings. I'm trying to think. Xavier Howard is another really good one. I don't know if he's better than Lattimore, though. I'm just trying to kind of do – I like this test here because it actually gives me an unfiltered, objective kind of test here. I'm just trying to think of the other cornerbacks I would have over him, and I'm really sure maybe Casey Hayward. That'd probably be it. I think Lattimore's easily a top 6 corner in the NFL, and or probably about a top 6 corner in the NFL, and I'd probably rate him about 94 or 93. So what's he at?
Okay. So you were almost close, which means you're not close. He is ranked number 14 at an 87 overall. And just before you're thinking, maybe there's so many good players, there are 2 people with the last name Fuller. I think they are brothers, but there's 2 Fullers above Marshawn Lattimore.
Kyle Fuller for the Bears is probably ranked ahead of him, although I don't agree with it. But he's probably in the 80s, or he should be in the 80s if I had to guess. And Fuller.
Kendall Fuller is an 87.
Oh, okay. Wow, that's really bold for Kendall Fuller. That's really bold for Kendall Fuller. That's probably one of the crazier things I've heard so far. So, no, Lattimore should be above both of those players in my opinion. And yeah, it sounds like I'm not hearing you saying any Saints players have been are being overrated here. It sounds like Madden, if anything, is underrating all these Saints players. But I don't really take that much of an issue with the offensive guys you named. These defensive guys, Lattimore and Cam Jordan, should be at least five rating points higher, which I do take issue with. But yeah, that's crazy. I was reading an article since we're on the subject of cornerbacks. I was reading an article and I noticed that Richard Sherman was a 93 overall, and that has to be brought up because wow, I mean that's really ambitious there, right? I mean, this guy's play has dropped. I mean, Richard Sherman is going to be a Hall of Fame cornerback. I mean, there's no doubt about that. He's going to be a Hall of Famer. But wow, I mean, it's been a while since he's played like a 93. You know, I would put Richard Sherman more like an 85 at this point, and that's an 8-point drop off, and that's probably the biggest one that I've seen or that I've heard of at least that would be a difference from my ranking.
Yeah, and you went exactly to where I was going next, is that Richard Sherman is a 93, putting him 6 points ahead of Marshawn Lattimore, who is years younger and playing at a higher level. I mean, just to give you another example, Xavier Rhodes is an 86, and Marshawn Lattimore is an 87, and I think I'd rather have either one of them than Richard Sherman at their age right now.
Yeah, Rhodes is a really good player. Lattimore's obviously a really good player. I think Lattimore's a little better than Rhodes. But yeah, I would put Lattimore, again, around 93 or 94. I also read an article that said Ryan Shazier is still in the game. What's up with that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess he's technically still – I mean, he's still on the roster for Pittsburgh. I think as long as they are technically on the team.
So are you allowed to play with him?
I'm not sure exactly on that. If you can actually play with him, he may come up on an injured list. Again, the game doesn't come out, I believe, until the first week of August, so we'll kind of know then if he is a playable player at this point. But
he definitely should not be playable. I mean, he's got like a 0% chance of ever putting on an NFL jersey again, unless it's for like a ceremony, of course. But 0% chance of him playing in the NFL again. So I don't know why he would be eligible. And if he is eligible, I imagine they have him as a high rating because he was one of the best linebackers in the league when he sustained his extremely serious injury. And now, if you're able to play with an extremely talented player with a high rating, and that would be cheating, I would assume. But I don't know. That's pretty interesting right there.
Yeah, so I remember, it's been a while. I haven't played Madden in probably the last 2 seasons, but I used to frequently get it every single year. And what the option was to either start like a regular season with actual injuries. So there was a toggle of you can actually change it, to have everybody just like a clean slate or people where they actually were with the updated roster. So I think that's probably he'll start just in season-ending injury type of list, but probably just shouldn't be in the game.
Gotcha.
So
yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, and so again, we want to kind of keep it to the upper tier guys, and we'll go over a few other guys, but as a group, I kind of want to go over. I know that you tweeted about the offensive line where you thought it should be. I wanted to give you the numbers of what the actual rankings are for our starting or potential starting offensive line. So Armstead is at an 88. Ramczyk is at 86. Warford at 80. Andres Pete at a 72. And then Eric McCoy, if he does start, he'll be a 67 overall. Some of those numbers sound okay. Andres Pete, if we're paying him $99 million a year, 72 seems very low, but could be closer to an actuality, though.
Yeah, I actually have no issue with the Andres Pete rating right there. If anything, if you're basing it on last season, I think that you could argue that Andres Pete is actually too high, honestly, if you're basing it on last season. Now, that would be unfair because he played a good portion of last season with a broken hand, and he played through it, and it caused him to struggle against some of the elite defensive tackles that we saw in the playoffs, like Fletcher Cox and Aaron Donald. But almost anyone struggles against them. But especially if you're not playing with one of your hands, that's going to be a real problem. So, and it was. But so Andres Pete, I don't really have an issue with the grade. I think it's probably too high, if anything. Eric McCoy, I mean, hey, he's a rookie. If you want to rate him in the 60s because he hasn't been proven, I'm not gonna argue that. Hopefully he turns out to be better than a 67 rated player in actuality. The tackles are too low, right? I mean, that's the concern here, and that's what I mainly tweeted about, is that this was before the Madden ratings came out, is there was some kind of leak on the offensive line, and somebody tweeted, I think it was a Saints beat writer tweeted our offensive line ratings, and I kind of retweeted it and commented on it and said, hey, like, this is what I would rank them, not knowing anything or how they were ranked. To me, unless you're factoring in durability big time, which is fair for Teron Armstead, I think Teron Armstead, when healthy, is one of the best offensive linemen, period, in the NFL. So I would probably put him at like a 95 or 94. If you're throwing his durability in there, he does seem to always miss time, so maybe you could drop it down to like a 93 or something like that. But 88 is far too low for one of the best left tackles in football. And then and Ryan Ramczyk. I mean, he's one of the best right tackles in football already. And yeah, he's got some work to do. He's not as polished as Teron Armstead is, and not as valuable yet. But Ramczyk being what did you mention he was, an 87 or an 86 or something like that? I think he should be closer to like 91 or 92. And then Warford, yeah, I'd say about 82, I guess. To me, the Saints' offensive tackles are ranked too low. So I hate to sound like a homer here, but I'm ranking all of these Saints. I think they're ranked a little too low by Madden. I'm trying to be objective here, but I think you're you're trying to get me in a trap here. I think you're picking the players that a lot of people are complaining about. But yeah, no, I think that I do think that the one, to me, the biggest travesty is Cam Jordan and probably Marshawn Lattimore. Teron Armstead ranking is pretty surprising, though. I can see Ryan Ramczyk being an 88. Like, I wouldn't argue it too much. But Armstead, Lattimore, and Cam Jordan are my biggest concerns for the Saints. I think they're the biggest inaccuracies. I know a lot of people, again, are complaining about Drew and Kamara, but I don't know. Those really didn't shock the core for me. I didn't think they were that crazy. If you can argue all you want who should be ahead of them. Like, that's a whole different argument, right? Like, if you want to argue Rivers shouldn't be ahead of Breeze, yeah, I'm going to agree with you. But if you just tell me Drew Brees is a 92 at this stage of his career based on how he finished last season, I'd say, yeah, that's about right. But, yeah, of course I'm going to argue to the end of time that Phillip Rivers is not a better quarterback than Drew Brees.
Okay, and so the last individual guy I kind of wanted to go over is sort of like a fan favorite going on right now is the backup quarterback Taysom Hill. Everyone sees a overall 56 and just, if you're not a Madden player, you're kind of going to be like, what is going on? A 56? He's, getting catches and touchdowns. He's sort of just an all do-it-all kind of guy. And how is he going to be a 56 overall when he's contributed so much to the team?
Yeah, but do they have him at quarterback is the question.
That's exactly it. So if anybody's listening that sees that Taysom Hill at 56 and wondering how could that be, so just to give you sort of a breakdown of how Madden really works with its algorithm is that when you are assigning an attribute, like a point number to a certain skill level, it is at a weighted percentage. So, for example, if you're a quarterback or if you're a kicker, your throwing power and throwing accuracy and your kicking power and kicking accuracy are going to be much different than if you have, high speed or if you're, have a big agility number. None of that matters compared to what those core things are, specifically for that position. So just for an example, Taysom Hill is, again, rated as a 56 overall. Teddy Bridgewater's a 73, and Drew Brees is a 92. To a regular person who plays Madden, this is kind of just par for the course, right? So the way that they actually grade these is 3 total things. It's a short, medium, and deep accuracy. And if we actually look them up as a pure passer, not as a runner, not as a blocker, not as a receiver, Taysom Hill compared to Teddy Bridgewater for short distance accuracy is a 72 compared to Teddy Bridgewater at 85 and Drew Brees the best at the game at 99. The middle range is 63 compared to Teddy's 80 and Drew's 95. And then the long distance where it actually goes up for Taysom Hill is a 68, Teddy is an 81, and Drew Brees is a 90. So when we see him actually throw a ball, you'll notice that his middle to higher goes up so that if we do a trick play, usually it may be a bomb that he may actually throw to them. So it'll go up versus just throwing that mid-range type of pass, which is a good thing that it goes up instead of actually down. But, I mean, does this sort of make sense as an outsider coming in and looking at these ratings for somebody like Taysom Hill, who's not actually really a quarterback, so-so in our system?
Yeah, it makes sense from the perspective that, obviously, like you said, if you're going to rate quarterbacks, I'm going to put emphasis on a certain number of attributes, right? Like, I'm going to care mostly about accuracy, right? That's going to be the thing that I would weight the most. So Drew Brees is obviously, in my opinion, he's the most accurate quarterback in the NFL, bar none. I don't think there's a single quarterback, Luck, Rodgers, Mahomes, Brady, whatever, who is more accurate than Drew Brees. So if Drew Brees' accuracy is going to be a 98 or 99, then that's going to weigh heavily on how I rank Drew Brees. But at the same time, you mentioned a quarterback's kicking power. Drew Brees can probably kick a football pretty far, but if it's ranked like, a 30 or something like that, that should not be any factor at all based on his quarterback rating in Madden. So, attributes that matter for quarterbacks, like accuracy and awareness is a huge one for me. I think footwork. I don't know if they have a footwork thing. They probably just have like speed or something like that, but and agility. But footwork for me for a quarterback, like pocket presence, I think that's like awareness. But that all, and then I would even rank probably 2 more attributes, probably even before throwing power. Throwing power is not that important to me. I mean, you got to have enough of an arm to make the throws, but you don't need to. You see all the time these quarterbacks like Joe Flacco, who's got like a big arm, or Matthew Stafford, who can make all the throws, but they're not as accurate. Accuracy would be the most important thing. So, yeah, it makes sense from a perspective that if you're going to rank these positions, certain traits are going to matter more for each position, and you're going to want to weight those traits more than, Drew Brees is like, the strength, for example. Like, I don't need Drew Brees to be that strong to be a great quarterback.
Right, and so the throwing power, throwing accuracy, and then those 3 distribution channels, short, medium, and deep, are pretty much the 5 weighted, probably, I think they said it around 89 to 90%. So if Taysom Hill's not following in there, he's obviously going to be a 56, and there's nothing actually wrong with this. This is the problem that I do have with the Madden rankings when people bring them up, is that somebody like a Sherrills or a Hardy on our team who is special teams, they may end up being a Pro Bowl player at their position. So we don't have accurate numbers on that specific position because if there's no...
Well, maybe that's a Madden problem then. Maybe they need to make a position for just kick returners and just have them play there. And like if you convert him to a receiver, then Sherrills can... Or sorry, he actually wouldn't be a receiver. He'd be a defensive back. But if you converted him to a defensive back, because he's played like a couple of snaps on defense before in his career. He's cornerback, I believe. And then he'll be like a 50-something, of course, because that's just not his game. But he can be an 89 or 90 rated returner, which he should be. Taysom Hill, if you actually put him at quarterback full-time, I think around 60. Yeah, probably around 60. I would put him. Yeah, he's not a very accurate passer at this stage in his career. I don't know if he ever will be, but there's not really an issue with Taysom's ranking. That the fact that he's 56 as a quarterback. I think the issue is that Madden probably needs to. I've already mentioned the issue about their defensive positions being all out of whack and not modern, but. They also sounds like they need to add positions for like special teamers, long snappers, kick and punt returners, etc.
And so I mean, it does come up that there's different ways to go about sorting Madden's filters to sort of go in and when you actually assign them as a kick returner or a punt returner. When it goes up to that, it'll actually show them as like a 92, a 93 based on that. That as an overall position, they're ranking them as a defensive back or as a wide receiver. So I try, the whole part of this podcast is to sort of break down why these rankings shouldn't be, attributed to these players as an actual player and what they actually do. So I kind of wanted to have that go through the podcast and see exactly why we're actually talking about it, because other than that, it's just conversation for a video game. Because the last guy I really wanted to talk about, and just for a brief moment, is Zach Wood. The poor guy, he's 36 overall. He's our long snapper. I think he's a decent player.
36?
Somehow, they found a way to get this guy down to nothing more than just meat and bones, just throwing a ball to somebody. And that's...
Well, that might be what he actually is in actual reality, but 36, I mean, that's just so harsh. That makes him sound like he's, that he has no business belonging in the NFL, to put it lightly. It makes him sound like he's just totally out of place. And that's a little harsh, 36.
And you might think to yourself, well, maybe there's other long snappers who are like a 39 and a 40. There are not. He's about 17 back for the next guy.
Wow. So they really just did him dirty. What's wrong with that? So I guess they're saying that if he were to somehow play, because they probably have him ranked as a center or something, right? So I guess they're trying to say if he were to play center full time, he would be a 36, which sounds horrible. Doesn't sound accurate at all. But the fact that they have no one within 17 points of his patheticness, that feels like an oversight to me. That feels kind of like an error. It looks like he kind of slipped through the cracks and they forgot about him maybe, because there's really no reason that anyone should be at 36.
Yeah, I don't think they forgot about him. I think they knew who he was. No, I'm just messing. I think that that brings it back to the whole point of, what is the ranking there or the rating there for if it's not to attribute him as a long snapper versus an offensive lineman? So
right.
I can understand if you filter it to him as a lineman and you're just going down that list, then yeah, he may be a 36 versus everybody else, which we in real life would be like a 2, but that's if he's a decent long snapper, I mean, I have no problem with him being like a 70 or a 71, depending on, where he falls within the long snapper range. But a 36 just seems like Madden did him very wrong, especially, 17 back or so. Just edge him up to like 45 or, get him close to the other guys if you can.
Yeah, that's crazy. And a lot of players, I remember there was that Redskins player who was ranked the worst player a couple of years ago, and he wrote a long letter to Madden. And I'm blanking on his name. You might know it because you're more of a Madden fan than I am. But he wrote this long letter to Madden. It was really funny. He was kind of a comedian about it. And it was basically like he was saying, excuse my language here, but he was basically saying, you have me as, a rated 40 person. It almost seems like I'm pretty much handicapped, right? And he was, making light of the situation and saying that they did him dirty, right, with his rating at least. And it kind of started a trend, it seems like, with now you're having players really care about their ratings. Like, I'm on Twitter and I'm following a lot of these beat writers, and they're tweeting some of these players who are like, for example, Dallas Cowboys stud defensive end DeMarcus Lawrence. I'm not sure what he was rated as, but whatever it was, he was not happy with it. And he's boycotting Madden and trying to get all his followers to boycott Madden. And he's just so upset over his rating. And it's like, this guy just signed like a $90 million contract, and he's so concerned that he's, rated a couple points low in Madden. It's crazy, but he is not the only one who's complaining about their rating. Keenan Allen posted a little Vine video about how he was upset with his rating. And there are several players who have taken notice for their ratings. And sometimes it even gets more specific, right? Like, when you take the overall sum of it, that's one thing. But a lot of receivers and defensive backs care about, their speed, right? So they'll be like, oh, they only have me as a 91 speed. I'm one of the fastest guys in the NFL. So I should be like a 99 speed, and they're taking issue to this. So it's pretty interesting to see.
Yeah, I mean, it's become a point where they're being graded almost like a resume to them, and they're offended if they're lower than what they thought they were, or they're grouped with somebody who they think they should be better than. So I think it was a great conversation, and I think across the board we were a little underrated, I think, on a lot of players, but I think it's close with most of the things. I just think, like you said, some of situational players, I think it makes it hard to give an accurate description. That's why you should always follow, actual NFL analysts rather than doing Madden, the Madden ratings. But I just thought it was fun just to kind of see where everybody fits and see how the players reacted to that. Any final thoughts?
Yeah, I know, absolutely. I mean, thanks for having me on. It's always fun to talk about where I value players and comparing them to other players. And that's always a fun conversation. You can do it all day with pretty much every team. And here's the thing about this, Piano Man. I'm sure a ton of Saints fans feel like they got snubbed with their team. But if you ask every other fan base, all 31 other teams and their fans probably feel that they got snubbed too, right? Like, this is not just the Saints here. Pretty much every fan base probably can list a number of players that they think are way better and should be rated way higher. So, it's just one of those things, man. It's just like, hey, no rating system is going to be totally perfect. And that's why, if you see a player that that is only rated 1 or 2 points away from where you think they should be, don't really blink an eye at that. That's no big deal. But if you're talking like, I was looking at the tight end list earlier, for example, and like Delaney Walker was a 92 and George Kittle's a 90. And I was like, wow, they didn't really learn much from last season, I guess. And then they had all these tight ends in the high 80s, like Trey Burton and Eric Ebron and Jack Doyle and Hooper and Rudolph and Jimmy Graham and Eifert and Olsen were ranked in the very high 80s, like 89 or something. I was like, wow, those guys are over the hill, man. Like, these guys are low 80s, high 70s at best. And then the craziest thing I saw, we haven't even mentioned the craziest thing. Besides the fact that O.J. Howard and Evan Ingram were the 14th and 15th best tight ends, respectively, which is criminal here. But we haven't even mentioned the craziest thing yet. Jason Witten, right? That's kind of a Richard Sherman situation here, but even worse. He is an 83. An 83. So they're saying that Jason Witten is 1 point below O.J. Howard. Think about that for a second. Jason retired Witten. And well, he's coming back now, but wow, that was, I'm sitting here trying to defend Madden saying it's not going to be perfect, but wow, I mean, that seems like a huge
probably
oversight.
wasn't an 83 when he left.
Yeah, no, when he actually retired, there's no way he was playing 83 ball. I mean, he was, his last year of his career, his acceleration is probably like, a 56, or it should be at this point. So, I can't imagine him being an actual 83. I thought they rated all the tight ends too high. Pretty much all those guys I named were ranked way too high. Kittle obviously being too low at 90. But gosh, it really seemed like Madden was really overrating these tight ends who are over the hill, like Jimmy Graham and Eifert and Greg Olsen, who are all in the high 80s. Like, gosh, I don't view them like that at all.
Yeah, and that's another reason to kind of like tap into that, real life versus Madden is you've got a Delaney Walker who's in his mid-30s, who's a great tight end when he's healthy. But he's mid-30s, 92 versus a 20, early 20s Marshawn Lattimore at 87. I know that they're two different positions, but at their positions, are they really number 14?
Yeah, no, that's still crazy.
I know there's less tight ends, but a 92 versus an 87, it should match up what you are to that position. So,
yeah. And I think it's important not to grade these players. Like, if you're Madden and you have, like, you know how in fantasy drafts we have like Travis Kelce being drafted first, and then you have like Zach Ertz and George Kittle being like the next tier, like a couple rounds later, and then you have another tier of like O.J. Howard and Henry and Ingram like a couple rounds later. So in fantasy drafts, just because in fantasy drafts they respect the drop offs, right? It seems like in Madden, they're not really respecting the drop-off much. Like, I guess my point is, like, in fantasy drafts, we have no issue waiting a couple rounds after the elite tight ends are taken. But in Madden, it almost seems like they're afraid to say that, hey, there might be 3 great tight ends in the league right now who are all in the 90s, right? But, because, there's only 3 of them, we need to rank a bunch of guys in the high 80s just to like fill space. But no, that's not accurate. That's not right. Just because, you're trying to go down the list and you shouldn't try to put people close to each other. If there's actual drop-offs in real life between George Kittle and all these tight ends that, are honestly more like 70s, then don't try to put these tight ends at like 88 and then some at 87, some at 86, just to make it like, visibly appealing for the eye and just to make it like seem like it makes sense. It makes more sense to have the actual drop-offs in talent exist. So in Madden, they're valued correctly, right?
Right. That's sort of the whole situation. Again, it comes down to it being an inputted stat, like entering it in like an Excel sheet and coming up with a number versus an actual observation versus a particular skill group. And that's where I kind of think the difference is. It's sort of like that statistics versus the eye test kind of deal.
Right. Yeah, it's one of those things where they probably use a formula for this, I'm sure of it. But the statistics for any reason and any metric that you use, even in fantasy football, but at any NFL evaluation whatsoever, statistics should only be the starting point. They're only one piece of the puzzle. You can use statistics to back up your point, but they're not the end-all, be-all. So I think Madden should be using statistics as a tool in the same way. They shouldn't be having their ratings solely based on the formula. You use the stats and you get out their overall ratings, and then you kind of go through it and with a fine-tooth comb and say, okay, what really makes sense? Should all these guys really be in the high 80s right here when George Kittle is at 90? No, they shouldn't be, because George Kittle is way better than all these guys. It doesn't make sense if Marshawn Lattimore is the 14th ranked cornerback in the league, or O.J. Howard's the 14th ranked tight end in the league. No, that doesn't make sense. So it sounds like Madden purely does it and I don't know this for sure, but it sounds like it seems like they're only using their formula and they're not actually doing a great job of, I'm sure they have some quality control there, but they're not actually doing a great job of comparing these players in other aspects other than their statistical, the statistics that make up that formula.
Yeah, and that's all we have for this podcast today. So, again, it's a special episode specifically just for Madden ratings, and we're doing the Saints. We just kind of wanted to fill you guys in up until the next Saints or Pelicans podcast. Again, you can follow us at Best Podcast NOLA, and you can follow Nick directly on Twitter at Fantasy Law Guy and myself at JDixonNOLA. We are part of the BigEasySportsTalk.com website podcast. We have, all social media. It's Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. Go ahead and like that. That way you can catch all of the clips and the episodes each week that they come out. If you guys have any questions or if you want to be part of the podcast, go ahead and reach out to us and we'll get your best question answered each week. Thanks for checking us out. Have a great day, guys.